Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to finish out the Faction Identity series that focuses on that through the Tactics deck. And we're coming up across the neutral faction. So the neutrals in general, they have a lot of different units from different walks of life. Typically the feel behind neutrals is these are the ones who, you can purchase their services, or they're kind of out for themselves with no real alliance to anyone. They're like the go-getters of the A Song of Ice and Fire world. They're trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So we've got a lot of like NCUs and commanders and units that can be utilized by other factions. So if you were playing something like Starks, you could bring in like some Bolton Flayed Men or something like that as a neutral piece to your army. The neutrals also have their own specific faction tactics deck, and it allows them to just kind of play as all neutrals instead of having to staple themselves to another, I would say, like, in quotes, established faction in the game. So right now, at least, the neutrals are comprised of House Bolton, the Stormcrows, the Bloody Mummers, and we have some Hedge Knights coming soon, and there are a whole host of characters from the Ice and Fire series that don't really have any kind of true ties to any one house. They kind of have their loyalties shift like the wind, so to speak. So that kind of leaves us in this interestingly awkward position where the neutral faction identity is a little bit harder to pin down because there isn't really any one specific mindset or type of house that, this is the way that they interact with the world that kind of hones in on a faction identity throughout the whole thing. And especially it gets a little weird when you're like taking parts of the neutral faction and plugging them into other lists. You want to make sure that there's not just one type of overall identity that comes from the faction, but I still think I can hone in on one, and it's just that the neutrals are heavily tactics based, and they also really like to focus on a lot of extra bits from their commanders to kind of give you a better feel for the army you're playing. So the identity really kind of shifts between which commander you're actually playing for the neutrals. They all bring kind of their own little elements and spice, and the tactics deck allows you to immerse yourself in that kind of interaction. So the first card up for discussion in the neutral tactics deck is Planning and Insight. Now this is a variation of Wealth and Cunning from the 1.6 and earlier deck, but this triggers when a unit is performing a melee attack before rolling the attack dice. You choose one, and then this attack either deals +1 hit, or after rolling the defense dice, the defender blocks +1 hit. If you control the missive on the tactics board, or if your commander's unit is the attacker or defender, you deal or block +1 hit. So the cool thing about this card is they kind of pulled, and this is a theme throughout the deck that we'll see, is they pulled away from the neutrals wanting to have the coin or the wealth zone on the tactics board, and really honed in on this, or focused in on this, controlling the missive on the tactics board. And for me, that kind of ties in thematically. At least this is the way that I think of it. It's either someone that's, behind the scenes working with these neutral folks, doing what they're doing in the game, or sending them their orders, so they like to make sure that they've got a free flow of that coming in, or it is meant to represent that the commander is trying to organize his troops and his units because they're kind of a little disjointed anyways, being more on the neutral and ragtag side, right? Because you'll be having something like Boltons mixed with Zorse Riders or something like that, and they probably need to make sure that those lines of communication are super open because they aren't a practiced army. But anyways, getting back to Planning and Insight, this card is very, it's not situational, it's very reactionary, like or flexible, I guess is what you could call it. You can either use it when you're going on the offensive to deal some extra damage, or you can use it on the defensive to save yourself some extra damage. And we kind of get this idea of the commander focus again that I had mentioned earlier, because if your commander's the one using this, you don't have to worry about what zone on the tactics board you control, because they are the source of all like information and command in this army, more so than any other one, right? And you want to make sure that you're keeping them alive, or that they're, they should be the ones that are fighting really well because they know what they're doing. So planning and insight, I think, is a great variation of wealth and cunning, and it'll definitely be one that people are going to want to. I think a lot of people will want to save this for their commander, but sometimes if you just want to make sure that a unit's sticking around a little bit longer, especially some of those more squishy ones, this is a perfect card to make sure that happens. The other cool thing too is that with the attack dealing +1 hit, any kind of modifiers or something like that, or not modifiers, but rules like sundering and things like that, those will apply to that extra hit. So it's nice to use this on a unit that's got a little bit more combat oomph than some of the other ones. The next card up is Adaptive Methods. This triggers at the start of any turn. You replace one condition token on any one unit with any other condition token. If you control the missive, you may move one condition token from one unit to any other unit. So Adaptive Methods is a legacy card from the original deck, and it has changed very little. So the big difference for this one now, and it is a kind of win, but not really, is that you don't have to expend the condition token to change it like you used to before. The only reason why that really matters is because somebody might have some orders or tactics cards that might be able to trigger when a condition token is expended, and this one you just get to replace it. There's no language in the game to really stop something like that outside of like someone counterplotting or whatever to stop a card from going off. Otherwise, the game the card's basically the same going into 1.7. It's nice to note that it could be overlooked, but I think if you read the card, you get the gist of it. That when you decide, if you have the missive on the tactics zone that allows you to move the condition tokens around, you don't necessarily need to move the one that you're replacing on that other model or unit. You can you can change a vulnerable token into a weakened token on an enemy unit and then move like maybe a weakened token from one of your units to another one or another enemy unit. It doesn't have to be the same one. So that the Adaptive Methods is just a really fun and tricky way to kind of make sure that your army has some defense against these condition tokens, because it's not something that you frequently find in the neutral faction in general. The next card up is a new one to 1.7, and that's Issue Commands. This has two different modes for the cards, so if you're not used to seeing these types of cards when they have like two separate triggers and two separate boxes, it means when you're wanting to play the card, you can either you can match a condition for either one of those, and then that's the type of thing that happens with this card. You don't get to do like both of them or anything like that, of course, because they have different triggers and you'd have to get rid of the card one way or the other. But this is also a type of card that's fairly new to the 1.7 rules set, or just A Song of Ice and Fire in general. So Issue Commands, the first part of it, triggers when your commander unit activates. Instead of this unit performing an action this turn, you target one other friendly unit within long range, and they perform one attack or charge action. The other mode for this card is that at the start of the turn, you can target one friendly combat unit and remove an order token from that unit. They must use that order, or I'm sorry, they may use that order again this round, not must. But Issue Commands is a really spiffy card for the neutral faction, and it's great that it's a base tactics deck card. This kind of really is another justification for my my theory, at least, that the commanders really make the neutral faction. You're able to, if your commander's doing what they need to do, they might be parking it on an objective and not really contributing to the game because you want to make sure you're scoring those points. They can at least use their tactical flexibility to say, I'm not going to activate this turn, and instead someone else in my army is going to do something because I need them to go do that, instead of me just wasting my time sitting on this objective, not really doing anything other than looking pretty and maybe pivoting a few times. The other nice thing about this card is that if your commander unit happens to be gone by the time you hit something like this, it doesn't mean the card's worthless to you. Usually when they have these cards that have dual modes, it's because they have very specific triggers that rely on something being on the table. And being able to remove order tokens is pretty nice as well, because there are quite a few attachments and units in the neutral faction that have some pretty amazing orders. And just being able to utilize those more than once in an entire round is going to pay off pretty big. So even if your commander might be hanging around on the table, you still might want to be utilizing that extra order. This is just a very versatile and flexible card, which is another kind of theme in the neutral faction in general, is that they are quite flexible. In the past, I think some people kind of considered this deck to be more of a Swiss Army knife, and I don't know if I 100% would agree with that kind of interpretation now, as much as I think that the tactics deck is a catalyst to making sure you can get a good established identity by utilizing a lot of your commander's rules and influence on the table. Next up, we have Worth the Risk. This is a variation on Worth the Reward from the original Neutral Tactics deck, but Worth the Risk triggers when a friendly unit's performing a morale test after rolling the dice. The unit may re-roll any dice for this test, and if the unit is within short range of your commander, they automatically pass it instead. So some cool things about Worth the Risk is that the old card had to trigger when it was a failure. Not to say that you would ever want to try and re-roll on a success, but you just get to see what the results are before you decide to use this card or not. And very specifically, another rule that some people might not be keen to if they're coming into the game with a fresh face or fresh eyes is that when the term or the sentence that says you can re-roll any dice for this test, that also means you can re-roll the damage die. So you might be having a unit that you did fail the test, and it's very unlikely that they'll pass it, so you could just re-roll the damage die to make sure, or to try and get them to take less wounds. But why would you not just re-roll the whole set anyways, because you can still pass on double sixes if it's the absolute abysmal worst panic test in the universe. But the Worth the Risk being able to just allow the unit to auto pass that test as well is pretty nice. All you need is to be close to your commander, where Worth the Reward used to say that you had to have the wealth zone in order to do this. So there's no reliance on the tactics board with this one, and it just gets back into that or reinforces my statement that the commanders really are the heart and soul of playing the faction, or playing the neutrals faction by itself. And most of these commanders have a very active role on the table, so you'll want them kind of in the mix and in the business, and having things around them to make sure that they're not getting wiped off the table. So Worth the Risk can just make it so that a unit sticks around a lot longer, and the neutrals, at least for the most part, are not really well known for a high morale stat. So it's going to be a really powerful and useful card in the tactics deck, even though when you kind of look at it at first, you might not be thinking the same. Next up for the deck, we have Meticulous Planning. This is another one of those two-mode cards to kind of showcase flexibility, but this one's got a little bit more of a tweak to it. It's not so much flexible as it is giving you another mode to capitalize on it. So the first part of this card triggers at the end of any round. You search your tactics deck for one commander card, and then add it to your hand. You shuffle your deck afterwards. The other mode of this is at the start of any turn, if you control the missive. You search your tactics deck for one commander card, add it to your hand, then shuffle your deck. So for those of you also, again, new to the game, round and turn have a very specific difference between them. The round is a collection of turns. It's the whole interaction of all activations over the course of that one iteration, which would be called a round. Whereas a turn is the small events of units activating. So if I were to say activate my NCU at the top of a round, that's my first turn. Then the next turn goes to the opponent, they activate a unit, then the turn comes back to me, a new turn started, so I can do something that way. So the way this works is that if you don't have the missive, it means that you have to wait until the end of the round to be able to go fetch one of your commander's tactics cards. And that's not the most terrible thing in the universe, because you can trigger this card at the end of the round in that cleanup phase, and then go get the commander card that you want, and still be able to kind of reconfigure your hand through the pitching of cards from your tactics hand to kind of redraw new ones. So the second part of this card is just a reward for being able to do the things you want to do as a neutral player, and make sure that you're getting those cards off of the missive. So it's kind of a funky boost trigger, so you're able to just kind of get that card whenever you need it if you have that zone on the tactics board, but you've also been drawing cards then, so the chances of you really needing that are a little bit less. because you have been drawing cards. But again, there's a lot of cards that get added to the tactics deck. I mean, we end up going up to 20 cards, I believe, once everything's said and done. So just drawing 2 of those, you aren't likely to always get the specific card you want. But again, just another way of confirming that the commanders are really the heart and soul of giving the neutral faction their identity. And meticulous planning is going to be really great for trying to make sure that the specific game style mode that you're bringing to the table is one you can engage in on your own terms. Next up is another legacy card from the 1.6 and previous versions deck, and this is Surprise Strategy. This triggers at the start of a friendly turn. You discard this card and one other card to return 1 card from your discard pile to your hand. If you control the missive on the tactic zone, you do not have to discard this card. So, or I'm sorry, you only have to discard this card. If that was the other way around, Surprise Strategy would be nuts. But anyways, Surprise Strategy in 1.6 was really a bonkers card. It stopped you from playing your opponent from playing tactics cards, and you were able to get things back if you had the missive. But with this one, it's just like you can trade 2 cards in your hand, which would be Surprise Strategy and the one you originally discard to pull 1 back. So you could have some cards that maybe aren't servicing you very well for this turn or for the foreseeable future. So you can get rid of that to get one that you will find more value in, especially some of those commander cards that you've already played. You know, some of those commander cards for the neutrals are just quite devastating in general. So having the ability to get them back is quite nice. And if you do happen to have the missive on the tactics zone, you only have to get rid of Surprise Strategy when you try to pull that card back. So overall, it's again still feeding into that idea that the commanders are the center of everything the neutrals do. But you can still get some of the other cards that you would have played that might help you out that we've already kind of talked about. So Surprise Strategy is another real flexible card and lends a lot of reactionary, or not reactionary, more like recovery type tactics to the neutrals. You can kind of get what you want when you need it. The final card in the Neutrals Tactics deck is Spoils of War. This is another legacy card, but has gone under quite a few changes in its new iteration. It now triggers at the start of a friendly turn. You attach this card to a friendly cavalry or infantry unit until the end of the game. While it's attached, each time an enemy in short range is destroyed, you place 1 order token on this card. This unit's melee attacks gain the following abilities based on the number of order tokens that are on this unit, and they are cumulative. So if you have 1 or more, before rolling the attack dice, the defender becomes vulnerable. If you have 2, the unit gets +1 to hit. So Spoils of War was probably one of the more bonkers cards in the entirety of the neutral deck. It was a way to really shift a lot of wounds back into your units, and it was kind of like a win more card almost, because you'd be destroying your opponent's stuff, filling up, a ton of units back to or a ton of wounds back to your units. But now it's kind of transitioned into a way to kind of bring a little bit more combat prowess to the neutral force, which it's not that they don't have, it's just that you are able to kind of buff up some things since they aren't really like specializing in that all the time. Although I could see like the Hedge Knights getting this and just being an absolute nightmare to deal with. But being able to make sure you're getting off that, getting some more combat value out of a unit by saying every time they attack, I'm going to make you vulnerable, is an amazing ability, especially when we look at things like having adaptive methods in there. And then just getting that +1 to hit means that you're going to become a little bit more dangerous in combat with those vulnerable tokens out there. I think this is another one of those cards that's kind of got the theme of it triggers when it normally would trigger when a specific thing happens, where, the old Spoils of War triggered when a unit was destroyed, but since the real estate in your tactics hand is much more valuable now than it used to be because you can only hold 5 cards, it's really great to get this out of your hand and on the table so you can start utilizing it at your own pace or however the game decides to unfold itself. And Spoils of War, I think, is going to go really far in making sure that the neutrals can still be a really devastating force on the table when you get some of these units that can really do a ton of work with something like this. So one of the things that comes up with neutral anything, if you're talking mercenaries from any other type of game in wargaming history, there's always a interesting balance that needs to happen in order to make them palatable to be played on their own. Because since all the factions most all the factions can utilize every tool you have, there's a good chance that they might be able to utilize it better than you can as a base neutral player doing nothing else outside of that. But what I think Cool Mini or Not's done has been quite elegant in the way that they've made the neutrals more attractive to take on their own. Previously, I wasn't a real huge fan of the neutrals on their just as a faction on their own. I felt like they were a little too pinned down to certain play styles, and that you didn't really have a whole lot of options available to you, which I still kind of think a little bit, because they do have the least amount of commanders of any faction in the entire game, including the Greyjoys that just released like a couple weeks ago. But the big thing about them is that they've really pulled in to say the commanders are now the things that will establish the identity of the faction. So you kind of have a lot of variability, and every time you change the commander, you're really changing the way that this whole army works, and it gives you a lot of versatility that makes playing neutrals really fun and rewarding as someone who's either into the unique tabletop experience or is very much interested in that narrative thematic exercise that you can go through when you're playing A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, this is a very narratively focused game, even though the mechanics are very competitively focused in that you can, you know, make a game of it, like it actually feels like a game. But then we have this cool narrative theme stapled in there, and when you play someone like Roose Bolton, you can really feel that you are the terrifying entity that he is, you know, one of the scariest men in all of the Iron Kingdoms. And I think that's a massive win, because I think most people who gravitate towards neutrals to play as a solo faction are really yearning for that type of experience. It's just the way it works. I don't know what it is. Usually you're not finding people who are like gung-ho competitive going into a neutrals only faction. Usually the people who are most attracted to this are the ones who are really interested in that thematic feel, like they really appreciate that in the game. And I think that Cool Mini or Not has done a good job recognizing that and actualizing that for the people who do want to play this faction. As the neutral releases keep coming out, we've got the Hedge Knights coming soon, and they have cool ways of altering the rest of the cavalry that are available to the faction. I think that the neutrals are just going to become nothing more than, or they're just only going to get better as time goes on. And every time you get a new commander in this faction, it's going to feel almost like you've gotten an entirely new faction, because you're really honing in on, you know, the commander is the one who forwards the gameplay mode. And I think that's a really cool thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that kind of evolves with the rest of the commanders that come out, because I think it's high time the neutrals get a Hero Box 3 that isn't just clogged with hero attachments or character attachments, and they start getting more commanders to try and see how this play style evolves. I'm looking very much forward to it, and the neutrals overall just are super fun, and I'm looking forward to trying to get some of them on the tabletop myself, actually. So with this kind of being the end of the faction identity series, outside needing to go tinker with the Free Folk video a little bit, what's next for the channel? So one of the things that I really want to get back into is the commander focused builds, and those will probably evolve a little bit to kind of incorporate some of the changes, or maybe kind of talk about how some of the units work, because usually it's me really talking about the commander and figuring out what units kind of play to their strengths and make sure that they're utilizing all of their tactics the best way they possibly can. But since the units have changed so much, I might evolve that series a little bit to make it a little bit more all-encompassing or altruistic. I don't know if not just if I have the capacity to do full faction reviews, more so I don't know if anyone actually wants to listen to me talking by myself for an hour and a half about factions. So that might be something I do in the future, might not be, but the next big thing that I want to try and do is going back to every single starter set and pulling out a commander. And I was originally thinking it was going to be one of the more underutilized commanders, like we could go back to Great John Umber, because I think he's changed quite a bit and become a lot more of an attractive play in the Stark faction, especially Jamie. Jamie I want to talk about for days, because I think he's just the most improved. If there was a top 5 video coming out tomorrow from me about most improved in 2021, it would be Jamie Lannister. But that's really the next step is going to be those. And then I might come up with some cool ideas to talk about the factions and the transitions into the 2021 version. And of course, battle reports are on the table. I just need to start kind of scheduling those out and making sure that I can get someone who's ready to play and sit down for 3 hours and work on one. So there's a lot to look forward from me in 2021, and I'm super excited for the game, and I hope you all are enjoying these videos and this series. You can leave some comments below if there's something specifically that you want to see from me that, maybe I didn't think of. It's always nice to get feedback from the community and see where they want to see the channel guided, because I really do make this stuff for everyone who watches it, and you have the unique opportunity to try and guide my hand with some of these. So if you have anything, feel free to list it below, and it might be, something that you see in the next month or so.